Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Today y Mañana. I'm Alex. This is Xavier. We're very excited to have you joining us on a beautiful morning here in Charlottesville, Virginia. It is bright, it is sunny, it is warm, it is soon to be hot. So it's basically everything you could expect from the summer solstice here in Charlottesville.
It's funny. So you said good. I always thought about. Remember that Good Morning Vietnam? You know where he.
With what's his name?
Good Morning Vietnam. So
yeah,
I just kept saying someday Alex is going to say Good Morning Charlottesville.
pull out the Robin Williams impression. I don't think I would do quite as good a job.
Well, the jokes wouldn't be as good.
Yeah, well, that's for sure. That's for sure. The difference between me and Robin Williams there is tremendous. Quite tremendous.
You have other talents, though, that he didn't have.
That's true. That's true. I can talk finance.
Yeah,
for one.
Exactly.
For one. So we're going to be...
Well, you could talk finance, but it wouldn't make any sense.
Yeah, exactly.
It'd be funny, but it wouldn't make any sense.
It'd be funny, but you might... I wouldn't recommend any of your financial advice from old Robin Williams clips. But Xavier and I are going to be talking some finance this morning.
Yep.
We'll cover a lot of different things, maybe some tips of things to look out for when buying ETFs or mutual funds when you're investing either for yourself or if you have an advisor or one of those robo funds or Fidelity or wherever you may be storing away your savings. We'll talk a little bit about that. We'll talk about the bond market. We'll talk some interesting things happening related to that. Yeah. I know there's a Japanese bank that made some interesting bets as well as some mutual funds and ETFs. We'll talk about that a little bit. I'll mention it now, and then again at the end of the show, we'll talk a little bit about what's upcoming this weekend from Charlottesville Opera and more. And if you have any questions, comments, we will read those and talk about those as well. So we have a lot to cover. I did want to congratulate, I know Michael and I touched on it, I think it was last week, was him and myself. UVA baseball didn't advance in the College World Series, but we wanted to just congratulate them. It was still, anytime you made it to the College World Series, you got to remember, that's the equivalent of the Elite Eight in basketball. In other words, if you made it to the College World Series, you were one of the top 8 teams
in the country
exactly. In baseball.
Yeah.
So UVA baseball made it, ran into a really tough luck loss in the first game of the bracket against North Carolina, ran into a hot team in Florida State the next day. Florida State got out of the losers bracket and only lost to the number 1 team in the country in Tennessee. So it was a good year for UVA baseball. Just congratulations to the team. They did a great job.
It was a lot of fun. It was one of those teams that was just a lot of fun to watch because, sometimes you sit there for 3 or 4 innings and I'm doing anything and they just explode. Boom, boom, boom.
6-7 runs in an inning.
It was just, when you see that kind of baseball,
they were a great team and we look forward to what comes next year for them. So just congratulations to them. Already got some people tuning in the show this morning. We got Dr. Elizabeth Urpí watching the show this morning. We have Anaya Hernandez watching the show this morning. Muchísimas gracias for joining us this morning. So always love our fantastic fans that tune in.
And don't forget to like and share. And if you want, you can even subscribe.
You can subscribe.
Just hit that button down there.
Exactly. Especially if you're on YouTube. I think there's a button you can...
Is it YouTube? Really?
YouTube
doesn't have a button. It's Facebook, right?
No, Facebook I don't think Facebook has a subscribe button.
Oh, really? So it's YouTube. Oh, it's YouTube. Okay. Gotcha.
Button. Exactly.
That's right. It's just you just have to be on the computer. You just keep watching off the TV.
Exactly. Gotcha. But you can get notifications on Facebook for Today Mañana,
gotcha.
So be sure to do that, and you'll be notified every time we got new content appearing on air. So we're excited for that. Of course, thank you to Emergent Financial Services. Thanks to our fantastic partners at Matthias, Realty, Charlottesville Opera, Craddock, Sirius Insurance, for Adelante. I think we got Matthias is coming on next week. And I think in a few weeks, we'll have Miguel from Craddock Sirius Insurance.
That's right, exactly.
So we're looking forward to that.
We saw him
always
yesterday. He said he's coming in.
To have Miguel on, along with some team members. And then always good to see Matthias, who will be joining us next week. Speaking of Charlottesville Opera, it is this weekend is the musical. So we are starting tomorrow. Music Man. I'll be going with the wonderful Dr. Elizabeth Urpí. Nicholas is going to be going with the wonderful nurse Elizabeth Urpí. And so be sure to check that out. It's tomorrow at 7 p.m. Okay. So June 21st, 7 p.m. June 22nd, Saturday at 1:30 p.m. and 7 p.m. And June 23rd, Sunday at 1:30 p.m. So you can get your tickets at charlottesvilleopera.org or theparamount.net because it will be at the Paramount Theater here downtown.
Yeah. Boy,
So
those guys are going to be busy. Those singers.
Yeah, when Danny was on last week, it was funny because he was like, when I was listing the shows, he goes, "Oh yeah, the two on Saturday."
That's got to be tough.
It's a rough one.
Yeah,
it's a rough one. So so there's a lot that goes on behind the scenes there.
I would think so. Yeah. No, that's going to be great though. That's a great musical.
It's going to be really enjoyable.
That's a great
musical. We went to see Guys and Dolls last year. Just fantastic, the production that they put on. Just a lot of fun.
Those are great. Listen, those are, to a certain respect, those are, first of all, they're musicals, and I think music is always fun, right? But it's also an entryway sometimes to other forms of music, right? So the musical kind of gives you an entryway sometimes to the opera, right? And, some people don't like opera, and that's fine. But it gives you an entryway there so that you can at least see one or two and see kind of the difference between the two, you know? But it's worthwhile, and I think it's great that they do both, right?
Same
because
here, yeah.
There's enough.
Great introductory
there's enough,
for family.
interest in both ends of the spectrum. Where some people say, "I love musicals, but I don't like operas." I'll say, "I love operas, but I don't like musicals." And there's those people in the middle. It's like anything that's music, I like.
Exactly. And speaking of the wonderful nurse Elizabeth Urpí, she is also tuning in.
So wonderful.
We appreciate her. So as always, alrighty. So I'm ready to jump into some finance.
Well, yeah. So I just want to kind of pick your brain a little bit, right? So a lot goes on in finance. Sometimes that it's behind the scenes that you just don't see, right? And obviously, as financial advisors, we get to see it, we get to look at it, we get to analyze it, and make some decisions, right? But I don't think that the common folk really pay a lot of attention to this, not because they can't, but it's because they're busy doing their own job, right? But one of the areas that I've always been intrigued is what they call the active portfolio management. So the difference between active portfolio management and passive management is that, let's assume that you are managing funds. Let's say you're managing stocks, right? And you're supposed to manage against the S&P 500, which is an index of the top 500 stocks in the United States. So you have a choice. You can either just go out there and buy all 500 stocks in the same weight as in the index, meaning that if, for example, Amazon is the biggest weight, market value, or NVIDIA, whatever, in your portfolio, you'd have the same kind of type of weight, right? Active management means that you sit there and say, well, yes, I know that Apple and NVIDIA and Microsoft are all in here, but I'm going to bet against them, right? So I'm not going to buy them.
Underweight them.
Or I'm going to underweight them.
Crazy and overweight them. You say, I think Apple's so good that even though it's 25% of the index, I'm going to make it 50% of my portfolio.
Exactly. You have a choice to basically, and not invest in all 500. You may say, if I invest in 30 or 40, that's good enough, or I can invest in 150. So that's what you call active management, means that you're trying to do better than the index. That's the goal, right? If you're trying to match the index, what's the point, right?
Well, which really is the difference, right? Passive means if you buy a passive fund, a passively managed fund, what you're saying is, I want this fund to match whatever its benchmark is, whatever
the return is.
I want to get the same return.
Exactly.
If you're active, if it's an active fund, you're saying, I want to do better. Because obviously no one would ever say, I want to do worse. Right? So if it's active, you're like, I want this guy to do better than the target or the benchmark.
That index, right.
That he's basically being tested on.
Exactly. And the thing you also have to notice is that because it is actively managed, the management fees, because every mutual fund has a series of fees, right? One of them is a management fee, that is, you're paying the portfolio manager, whoever's managing that fund, to manage it, right? In active management, typically those fees are higher, right? So you have to be cognizant of the fact that you are now paying somebody more in fees for him to do better than the index. So that's what you call active management. Interesting enough, when ETFs came out, they were not permitted to be active management ETFs.
Interesting.
They were just passive. Mutual funds historically have different types of, both, where it's a passive mutual fund versus an active. But when ETFs first came out, they weren't permitted, but then that's changed over the last couple of years. So now there are, And again,
Yes.
it doesn't mean you can't have an ETF that focuses on a particular sector of the market, like, biotechnologies or robotics.
Really, the question
or
is the manager trying to beat an
Exactly.
index, or is he just trying to track?
Exactly. So now there is active management, right? So those are the things that you have to look for. Is that something that I want? And the reason I bring that up is that because, as most people have probably heard this before, what we believe in is what they call an asset allocation. In other words, to diversify the portfolio across different sectors in the marketplace, whether it be, large cap value stocks, meaning really big stocks, growth stocks, small stocks. So you diversify a little bit in each of those three buckets. Whether you want to do some real estate stocks, whether you want to do some international stocks, whether you want to do some bonds, different type of bonds. So you diversify your portfolio. So in essence, by creating an allocation of that type, you are now investing in such a way that you are making, right, strategic allocations and decisions based on what you think the market is going to do.
I think that's an important consideration, because I think when people mostly use the term active management, they are thinking active from the stock selection perspective. In other words, an active fund. In other words, active management means that I'm not buying the S&P 500 index fund or ETF, right? I'm buying someone who's trying to beat that. But there are really two ways to be active. You have to be active on the stock selection side,
process, yeah.
But you can be active on the asset allocation side, which is to say that you put an active allocation where you say, I'm willing to move in and out of certain sectors depending where I think the economy is going. Because you could easily have a passive asset allocation. You could say, my risk is X, and I want this percent large, this percent medium, this percent small.
Easier than that, you can just go out there and buy a mutual fund ETF that invests in the complete stock market.
Yeah, you got 60% complete stock market, 40% complete bond market.
You got two funds, you're done.
Yeah, and that's completely passive.
Other than the fact that you've made a choice of 60-40 or 50-50, whatever.
Yeah, in other words, your only decision is, the only thing you care about is what's my overall risk level. I don't care whether I think a certain sector will do better or worse this year. I don't care whether recession's coming. I don't care what inflation is. I don't care about anything. All I care about is what is my risk tolerance between stocks and bonds, and that's what I do.
Exactly.
And it's possible to have a mix of things. So you could be have active asset allocation where you're pitching between sectors, and active fund management where you say, all right, not only do I think I want to be overweight biotechnology, I'm also going to pick a fund where that portfolio manager is trying to beat the biotech index. But you could be passive on the asset allocation side and active in the fund side. You could say, I want 60% stocks, 40% bonds, but I'm picking two funds, each of which is an active manager who's trying to beat the market.
Yeah.
Right? So you could have all these combinations, but it's not. But on the flip side, you can be which is what we tend to lean towards. I would think, which we can talk about, is you to be active on the asset allocation side. In other words, you're making strategic decisions on what sectors are going to do well. And you're making tactical decisions. In other words, I'm going to be in this sector for a while, but not permanently. And then be passive on the stock selection side. In other words, if you've determined, I think it's a good idea to be overweight biotechnology, I'm not going to pick which of the 200 or 300 biotechnology stocks are out there. I'm not going to pick a manager to beat the index. I'm literally just going to buy an ETF that tracks the biotechnology index. So you're active on the asset allocation side, but you're passive on the stock selection side.
Yes, yeah. And I guess that the bottom line is, how confident are you in your asset allocation? In other words, from the perspective of, I believe this is what may be happening in the economy, and therefore, if that's what I believe is going to happen in the economy, the sectors that are going to do well are the following. Could be the growth sector. Therefore, if the growth sector is going to do well, I know that the growth sector is 20% of the market in general. I like it to be 30%, right? So again, you now choose to allocate 30% of your funds into the growth sector of the market. My point being is that from an active point of view, what you have to pay attention to, because I think and this happens also a lot with the, and we've seen it with the robots doing the allocation, right? Is that you take a look and you see that they've got like all of a sudden 6-7 stock funds, right? And you start looking at these stock funds and you say, wait a minute, these 3 funds, right, are almost exactly the same, but when you look at them, the top 5 stocks are all exactly the same. And you do the allocation, you figure out, wait a minute, you are now extremely overweighted in 5 stocks. If that was your choice, great, I have no problem. But sometimes that's not what you intended to do.
A lot
it's
of
just
clients
that
are surprised to find out. We'll say, "Did you know, for instance, Apple is 10% of your portfolio?" And they're like, "No, it's not. I don't even know."
I don't even know Apple.
No, you own these
Exactly.
3 funds, all of which have Apple as the top.
Exactly, because they're active managers, and like those active managers say, "I like Apple." I like NVIDIA, I like Microsoft, I like whatever they may be, Google, Meta, those are the names that everybody seems to like, and they all put it in their portfolio, and before you know, it's like you are now overweighted in those particular stocks versus what the market as a whole. Again, if this is something that you want, that's fine, but you have to be careful when you start choosing, this one looks funky, I like it, he's an active guy, well, then go to the second guy, what's he invested in, right? And the reason I say that is that, one of the things that has occurred over the last, literally few years. Remember, I think it was last year or the year before that, SVB Bank went bankrupt, right? Because they made the wrong bet on interest rates in the sense that
Silicon Valley Bank.
They, in their capital structure, instead of investing in short-term bonds, they invested in long-term bonds. Rates went up. And they went underwater, right? Well, similar things have happened just recently, right? And that is, I think there's a major bank in Japan. I think it's called Narin Chunkin, something like that. I can't pronounce it. That bank.
Okay,
anyway.
well, forgive you for not speaking Japanese.
So I think they have about $360 billion invested. They got about a $9 billion loss in their portfolio, right? Wow. And now they are beginning to unwind some of their Treasury, U.S. government, and European bonds because they no longer can afford it. In other words, basically, when people start pulling money out of the bank, they got to do something, and they're selling those particular bonds.
So what bet did they make?
They did the same bet as this other fund I was going to talk about. They did the same bet in the sense that they came into this year saying the Fed's going to cut rates. And everybody said the Fed's going to cut rates, so therefore they're going to cut rates. Therefore, I'm buying long bonds. Right? Guess what? So far, the Fed hasn't cut rates. So the long bond position that you purchased is underwater, right? And so you're sitting there with the fact that you now have investors that are saying, I need my money back, and you no longer have the money. It's not a money market fund, right? So it's not trading at $1. Those bonds, if you bought them at 100, are probably worth 95, so you got losses in the books, right?
And so if everybody wants their 100 back,
exactly,
you're in trouble.
You're in trouble. And there's another, major asset management firm in California that manages a bond fund, right? They manage an active bond fund, right? And again, that one's also about $370 billion. They did the same thing. They've been very, very long on interest rates, and basically they're 97% of all other funds are outperforming them. The reason I bring this up is because there's one thing about investing in bond funds that you have to truly be aware of, right? One is, if you're investing in the complete bond market, that means you're investing every single bond out there from the 3-month Treasury bill all the way out to the 30-year. If you buy a genuine bond fund, you know at least that, yes, you are only buying U.S. bonds, meaning corporate bonds, Treasury bonds, U.S. agency bonds. So from that perspective, from the credit quality perspective, you're buying U.S. bonds, and most of them truly try to
mitigated what's called credit risk. Risk that the company goes bankrupt.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, if there's one or two that go bankrupt, you won't even feel it because they're so huge, right? But the important thing is that they are truly tracking an index, right? And I have challenges, I have problems with doing that. But in essence, if you know nothing about bonds and say, I just want that, that's a good way to go. That's fine, right? The bad part is when you try to buy an active bond guy, because then when you look at their portfolio, you realize, wait a minute, they're investing in Europe, they're investing in South America, they're investing in all these other countries, right? So now you have two risks. You have the risk of the country, you have the currency risk, in addition to the fact sometimes
you now have credit risk sometimes.
And credit risk, absolutely.
Is back.
And it's a different type of credit risk, right? Yep. And so you are now looking at a fund that is no longer truly tracking, even though it's tracking a particular index, the active is going away from the universe of bonds that index is targeting. So you're truly taking another risk level that you should be aware of. Again, if you're aware of it and you're happy with it, that's one thing, but not being aware of it is the key.
Something else.
Right?
I think the mistake that people can make is think, okay, if bond guy X, active bond manager X, is tracking this index over here, that all his bonds are going to be almost the same as the ones in the index, but he might change out a couple. But that doesn't have to be the case at all. And I think the temptation to be, well, he'll always be, maybe he'll beat it by 2 or lose to it by 2, but he'll always be close to the index. But that doesn't necessarily follow. In his attempt to beat the index, now, obviously, he'll have certain restrictions, right? I mean, your active managed bond guy tracking this index can't go out sometimes and buy stocks.
Right. The fund itself has some restrictions. He'll have
some constraints, but he doesn't have to, there's no guarantee that the return of the actively managed bond portfolio tracking this index is going to be near the index. He could underperform the index dramatically.
Exactly. And that's the key. So that's my point. My point is when you are looking to invest in whether it be a mutual fund or an ETF, right? It really behooves you to do a little bit more research and see exactly what is in this particular mutual fund. What are the investments in there? Are they exactly what we expect them to be? Do they have the treasuries, the agencies, the corporates, and the whole U.S.? Or are there other things on the side that they're investing in? And again, nothing wrong. I mean, there are funds out there that are alternative funds that use futures, they use options, they use other mechanisms, right, to increase the yield, the interest rate of the funds, right? Nothing wrong with that. As long as you understand what's going on and how those, what the risk parameters are and what the risk rewards are of that particular fund and what can make that fund underperform, right? Those are the key components. In other words, am I willing to take the risk that I'm going to get, 5% more in yield? But yes, if things go completely off, and
I might have a minus downside.
Exactly. So again, that's the important thing, because basically they'll say this is a total bond fund, and you go, great, that's what I want. It's like, no, there's just so many out there, but sometimes they're not really total bond funds. They're very active funds, which you're not getting what you think you are. Right?
Exactly. Well, and one of the challenges, let's face it, you go, particularly for people doing this themselves, you go online to your trading platform, you have an E-Trade or something like that, right? You go online, you see all these names of funds. The name of the fund doesn't say, there's no requirement that an actively managed bond fund says active bond fund total market. Right?
Exactly.
Just like an S&P 500, if there's a fund out there that the guy is trying to beat the S&P 500, it's not called actively managed beat the S&P 500 fund.
Exactly.
Right. It's going to have a different name. It's going to be, the Oppenheimer, total market fund, the Oppenheimer growth fund, the JP Morgan, growth fund, the American, fund. It's going to have some name, which is obviously giving you some idea of the fund, right? It'll indicate American stocks, European stocks, but it's not going to have the word passive or active in the name of the fund.
No, they won't. Yeah, you have to really look.
You have to actually click on it.
You have to look at the prospectus and look at it and see what exactly are they investing in. And as you mentioned before, what are their constraints? Because sometimes in the case of real passive funds, they have strict constraints. In other words, you can deviate, like even in a bond fund. Yeah, okay. I mean, you don't have to have, if 40% of the bond fund is treasuries, you might be able to go 35, 45, that kind of stuff, right?
Well, for instance, if you're tracking let's say you're tracking the 10-year treasury bill, right? It's not as though the bond fund manager is going to own like the identical all identical treasuries to the index. And he has all the same maturity dates. All the bonds were purchased on the same date. That's not going to be the case.
As a matter of fact, I mean, that's a good point, because as opposed to stocks, so even in the Russell 3000, which is a 3,000 stocks, which is almost a complete stock market here, right? You can literally go out and buy all 3,000 of those stocks, right? Easily, right? I shouldn't say easily, but pretty easily, right? The bond market, on the other hand, I mean, those are, you're looking at somewhere between 5,000 to 6,000 securities, some of which haven't traded in years. So if you're trying to create a bond fund that tracks that index, you're never buying that bond because it's not available. It's just, you can't buy it. I mean, you probably don't even know who owns it at this point in time.
Well, that's what people need to understand. So, when you buy a share of Disney, the only thing that matters, the price today may be different than it was 6 months ago, but it's the same share of Disney.
That's right.
Like, you're entitled to the same dividend. Everything about that share of Disney is the same. If you buy a 10-year United States Treasury bond today, it is not the same 10-year United States Treasury bond as 6 months ago. It may have a different coupon. Like, the interest rate on the face value of the bond may be different beyond just the price. So it's a fundamentally different. Well, it's the same.
Actually, at that point, it's a 9.5-year bond, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So it does. It changed, and that's a good point. Basically, it changes, right? So once you buy, if you're looking for a 10-year, you buy a 10-year today, right? Next year, it's a 9-year, right? So as a fund, if you are managing a 10-year fund, you need to sell that probably pretty close when it gets to 9 years and roll it out to 10 years, right? Again. So these things happen. But to your point, you buy a Disney bond, right? There are quite a few number of Disney bonds. So you can't just buy one. Credit-wise, they're all the same pretty much, right?
But it's not just one Disney
bond.
But
it's not just one. So you got to figure which one am I buying? Is that the right value? Is that the coupon that I want, et cetera, right? And so, and as I mentioned, even as a bond fund, when you're going out there to look for that Disney bond, it's just not available. In other words, not available means there's nobody literally selling that, because if I own it and I manage a $350 billion bond fund, I'm not selling that Disney because there's no incentive for me to sell it, right? So I'm holding it. So if you're looking for it, good luck, because I'm not selling and nobody else that I know is selling it, therefore it's not available, right? So that's a difference between bonds. You literally, when you create a bond fund and you manage a bond fund, it is a sample of the total market. So to a certain respect, it is somewhat actively managed, but because it's so much math-oriented, bonds are so much math-oriented, you can control a lot of the risk, whether it be the average coupon, maturity,
even if you
exactly.
don't have the same bonds.
Yeah. So, but what you don't want is, again, you don't want some fund that you think, I'm buying this. This is U.S. corporate bonds, and lo and behold, and you start looking deep inside. It's like, wait a minute, it's got Venezuelan bonds, Argentinian bonds, Mexican bonds. It's designed to beat the market. It's like, that's not what I want. I'm not saying it's good or bad. I'm just, it's just not what I want. You need to pay attention to that. So those are the things. When markets go through rough times, unfortunately, is when you see it the most. Because you come back and say, wait a minute, the bond market was up 4%, but I was down 2%. How's that possible? And what's possible is that, unfortunately, that particular manager made a bet that didn't work out, and if it wasn't a bet that you knew about or wanted, that's when you have to do.
That's when you have the problem.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's been, these are things that happen that, and again, because we do so much work, both on existing portfolios and portfolios that people come to us, right? It's always magnified when I see somebody come in and it's got like 20 different funds, and I'm saying, wow. And then you start looking at them. And the funny thing is, the majority of those funds are in stocks. Then you go to the bond side, and it's one. And it's like just a bond market. So nobody's paying attention. I mean, there's just so many opportunities in the bond market these days.
I think people kind of got lulled to sleep for a while, because for anyone out there thinking, how much could really happen with bonds? How important are bonds? Well, 2022 showed bonds are very important. Because how many people who lost 14%, because the bond market went down, the bond market down 14%?
Yeah.
How many people who lost 14% in their bond position by owning the entire bond market ever thought that you could lose 14% in bonds.
Yeah, nobody.
Nobody. It hadn't happened in over 100 years.
Ever.
Yeah, it was the worst bond market ever, or at least in recorded memory, recorded history. But in other words, when times are good, or bonds, rates are at 0% and nothing's happening, people are like, well, does it really matter what my bond position is? But it matters.
It matters a lot.
You can lose money.
Well, it matters across the board, and that's my point. In other words, and you said it perfectly, right? When times are good, you just look, it's like, okay, I got a 10% return. I'm happy, right? But sometimes you got to dig deep and say, okay, I got a 10% return. What's happening in my portfolio, though? Is there something good? I mean, maybe there's one fund, wow, wait a minute, this fund was up 35%, why? And this guy was down 14, and this guy was down 10. Yeah, the combination is 10, but is that what I wanted? In other words, this 35% up stock fund, what's it comprised of? So you got to pay attention and say, is that what I really want? Or maybe, hey, this was a good year. Do I really need so much of it in this fund anymore, or should I reallocate? And it's funny, I just read an article today about a gentleman who talked about that good investors don't fall in love with their investments, right? But a lot of people just fall in love with, oh, no, I love that stock, right? And he makes the point, say, sometimes you have to, when you invest, you can't fall in love with anything. You have to invest, it's up, whatever, 20, 30%. It's like, wow, that's done a great job. I need to figure out if there's something better out there, because the chances of this going up 20, 30% again are slim, right? It just doesn't happen very often. I'm not saying it never happens, especially with stocks. No, you've
got stocks that have huge returns.
Exactly.
But the point is that they're the rare exceptions, and it's the survivorship bias.
That's right.
For every Amazon that you point to, say Amazon went up like thousands of percents, right? Well, yeah, but there's all the ones that didn't go up thousands of percent and went back down and went bankrupt or gone. They're no longer in your sample.
So he made the point, which is like, you buy something that's worth 100, right? Then it goes to 120, you go, oh, no, I mean, I got 20%. That's great. I bet you it can go up a little bit more. Then it comes back to 100. And you go, I just, why sell that? It can go back to 120. Then it goes to 80. And you go, well, I'm not going to sell 80 now because, I might as well wait for it to get to 100. And then it goes to 60. So before you know it, you're now losing, right? So the point being is that you can't fall in love. You can't sit there and not sell because you have a gain. And he also mentioned about taxes, right? He says, people say, well, I don't want to pay taxes. Well, it's better to pay taxes on 20% that you made than lose 30, 40%.
Well, think about in dollar terms, right? If you went from $100 to $120, you now have $20 that you've made.
Right.
If you have to pay the government, let's say 20% of that.
A long-term gain. Let's say it's a long-term gain.
That means you pay the government $4, you keep 16.
Yeah.
Better to have the 16 and having paid the government 4 than to have 0 because it went back down to 100.
Yeah, exactly. Or lose 20 because it went down to 80. It's like you said, wow, no, I lost 20. Yeah, absolutely. So tax consequences are important, but when it comes to investing, it's like, is this the right investment? And wow, this did really well. Whether it be a stock, a mutual fund, whatever it may be, and say, maybe, and you may sit there and go, no, I don't really want to sell the whole thing, especially, again, in the asset allocation process, right, where you say, wow, growth stocks have done so well for 2 years that they are now a much greater percentage of the asset allocation that we originally, kind of designed it for, right? So is it time to pull back on the growth and diversify into value and small stock? Yeah, the answer is, if that's the appropriate allocation, the answer is yes. If, again, forcing you to make a decision, say, yeah, I didn't fall in love with growth because I know growth had lousy years too. It's time to sell and buy something else. There's always opportunities in the marketplace, whether it be the stock market or the bond market. There's always opportunities. You just have to pay attention and say, if this did very well, why? Do I want to stick with it? Or it's like, wow, I never expected to do that well. Exactly. Therefore, what do I do next?
They've done studies that show that the worst of all possible stock market strategies in terms of funds is to buy the fund or the manager who did best last year.
Right.
Out of all strategies, you're better off doing absolutely not. Like the person who did nothing, the person who bought one fund, when they tested buying one fund and just sticking with it no matter how bad it did, That was better than each year switching to the fund that did best the previous year.
Well, I mean, I remember Bloomberg used to have this thing where they used to, interview about 100 economists, and they'd ask them to kind of forecast where rates were going. And it was unbelievable because, whoever came on top one year, the chances are, they may not have gone to the bottom, but they were nowhere close to the top the following year, right? So it's just incredible. I mean, during the bull market of bonds where rates were coming down, but even though in 2004 they popped back up, right? You would just see it. It's just so funny. It's like, rates are coming down, and then they went up, and they just didn't do it, right? So, nobody has a magic wand as to what is going to happen tomorrow, right?
Exactly.
Nobody. I don't care who you are, not even Berkshire, right? I mean,
Warren Buffett. Not even Buffett.
Not even Buffett. I mean, you look at his history. There's been down years, right? He has this particular strategy that he applies to what he invests, and he sticks with it because there's been things that he's done that didn't necessarily work out, right? But over time, his investments have worked out. And he's stuck to his particular strategy, and that's the key. In other words, if you have a philosophy or strategy, the key is if you believe in it, stick with it, right? But again, I'm sure he does his research, deep research as to, is this working out the way I want it to work out? If not, I need to change. I need to find a better. No, the strategy is good, but I need to find a better replacement because that didn't work out the way I expected.
Exactly.
And we do that sometimes. We do our research. This looks like a great opportunity, and all of a sudden it's like, hey, it didn't work out this year. Do we think it's because it didn't work out this year, or because the opportunity is never work out, right?
Yeah.
And so you have to sit there and decide which of the two is it, right? And so, again, investors. When you do a robo investment, because that's what happens these days, they'll ask you, what's your age? Thank you very much. Boom. Yeah, when you're retiring, boom, here's your portfolio. It's probably not a bad idea to look at and say, oh my Lord, it's like, there's like 30 funds in here. Let me see if I know what they are and see if they make sense, right? Because maybe you may be looking at things and saying, I don't really want to invest in this. What is this? What is that? Is this something I want to invest in? And I'm not saying that you're smarter than the robot or the robot's smarter than you, but at least it's like, do I really want to be in this sector of the market at this point in time? You yourself may say, I'm not sure I want that, because then you can literally go ahead and say, I'm selling that fund.
Get rid of that one.
Yeah, get rid of that. I don't like that. I'll put that somewhere else. Yeah.
Well, and it goes back to also the due diligence on the fee question. Because you mentioned, obviously, active management has typically higher fees. So, which of course means that your active manager needs to do better than, in other words, if his fee is 2%, and that means he needs to do more than 2% better than the index to justify the fee. Otherwise, if he does 1% better than the index, but he charges 2%, then you're losing 2% every year.
Right.
But one of the things to watch out for.
It's like load funds.
That's exactly where I was going. Is that people need to be aware that particularly when you go out into the world of mutual funds, particularly when you leave the ETF space and you're looking at the world of mutual funds, which is where a lot of active management is still. I would still say the majority of active managed funds are in the mutual fund space.
And broker-dealers may use that because obvious reasons.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and it's important to know, in other words, we're not saying you have to be with a fee-only advisor, but if you are not with a fee-only advisor, then you need to be aware that one of the ways that your advisor makes money is commissions, which means there is a fee attached to a fund that is purchased, which goes to them. It's a different. Not saying one is better than the other. Obviously, it's obvious that the fact that we chose to be fee only, that we prefer that method. But you need to be aware that that's how a broker dealer makes money. If a broker dealer is your advisor, the way they make money in part is they buy a fund that has a fee attached to it, which it can be an annual fee, but it could be a front load or a back load.
Or both.
Or both.
All three, actually.
Or all three plus 12B1.
Plus 12B1.
So, but these are fees that you need to be aware that they exist. I think people just think, okay, all right, I see the expense ratio, it's 0.5%. That means, okay, the guy's going to charge me for 0.5% each time. Well, is there a front load? Because if the front load, which is very common, 5.5, we see this number all the time, 5.5 front load. That means you invest $100 100 is not being invested.
That's right.
5 goes to the
Five and a half, yeah.
5.5 goes to the
Yeah.
front load fee, and 94.5 is what gets invested. So you need, if 1% is the average industry fee, that means you break even in 5 years from a fee perspective.
Well, and to a certain respect, it's worse than that, right? Because you look at a lot of these funds, for whatever reason, they seem to be combined. They have what they call the front load fee. They have a 12B1 fee, right? So 12B1 fee is a marketing fee for the fund. So you're paying them to market the fund, which is usually about 1/4%. It's not a lot, but it's still 1/4%. So now you got annually. So now you got 5.5 plus a quarter, front load plus a quarter. You have the management fee that usually is, let's say it's 50 basis points in this case, 0.5%, right? And then sometimes you have a backload fee, means that when you sell, they also get 1%. So think about what we discussed before from an asset allocation point of view, which is why you and I like the management fee better, right? Is that if there's a decision that, okay, yes, I mean, growth has done well, but I'd like to go from growth to value or small caps or whatever else, I'm sitting there and going, wait a minute, there was a 5.5 plus a quarter plus a half plus 1% if I sell this fund this year. That is basically almost 7%. Was the market up? Was this fund more than 7% versus whatever index it was tracking?
And now you have to think about the change. If you're because the 12B1 fee is annual, the management fee is annual, so you're going to pay that no matter what you do.
No matter what.
But now you're sitting there saying, okay, I think I should switch. I need to sell some growth, buy some large cap, right? Well, you're sitting there saying, but if I sell the growth, I got to pay 1%, and if I buy the large cap, I got to pay 5% up front. So now I have a 6% loss by making this trade.
That's
do
right.
I think that growth will do 6% better than large cap in the next 5 years? Because it'll take me 5 years to break even on this.
Yeah.
And if the answer is no, you're sitting there saying, what now?
You're kind of stuck, yeah.
You're stuck.
Yeah, your asset allocation is stuck for at least 5 years, unless that fund just did so much better than its index. Right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, and it's also about transparency, right? Because a lot of people may not be aware that these fees are there. Because when you think about it, when you sign with someone who has, if you're dealing with an expense ratio, a management fee, an assets under management fee, that's disclosed to you there.
That's
right.
right.
In other words, you can see this being taken out. Right?
Yes.
Because, it has to be listed. When you get a statement, the front load is not in there.
No, it's not.
A front load fee does not have to show up as, here is the 5% that got taken out of your portfolio, because that's not where it comes from. The front load fee shows up as, you see $95 got invested in this fund, but you remember that you put $100 into this account.
Yeah, you literally have to go do the math and say, wait a minute, I gave him $100, and the market value of this thing now
at
is...
the time of purchase was 95.
95.
Where the other 5 go.
Yeah.
Right, so it doesn't show up as a fee, and it doesn't show up as a deduction on a statement. It shows up as the market value at purchase of this fund was, let's say you had $100,000. The market value at purchase of everything was $95,000, and you're like, where's the other 5? It's the front load fee.
Exactly. Yeah. So that's probably for most people that doesn't happen anymore. But if there is, and again, there's nothing against. That's how broker deals sometimes get paid.
A lot of 401ks we have seen it.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. You just have to be aware of it so that you know that is happening, right? And again, it comes back to how much work is an investor, advisor, or broker dealer doing for you? In other words, are they thinking of your portfolio on a continuous basis? And not to be continuous. I'm not sitting there that every single day you're looking for the portfolios, right?
Exactly.
It just sits there. It's like, we don't think about trading costs, right? Because there's no per se trading costs, right? We think about, is this advantageous to this client's portfolio? If the answer is yes, we do it. We don't have to do the analysis saying, oof, wait a minute. Now there's a back load, there's a front load. Are we going to make that kind of return? Is it for sure? No. We're looking at it. If we can make a 2% return better by switching, why not? If we have front load versus back load, we'd sit there and go, no, we can't do this.
Can't do it.
Right? Yeah. And so that person is actually not making the extra 2% in the market that they could. Right?
So yeah, it's important to know that these fees are out there, particularly when you go into the active management space, because that's where you're more likely to encounter them. You're not going to encounter many S&P 500 tracking ETFs that have a 5% front load, because that ETF would no longer exist.
No, exactly.
Because no one would use it, because everyone would be.
If you work through Fidelity and Schwab and you do it on your own, the chances are you're never even going to see these funds because you're not going to be.
If you do it proprietary, some of their proprietary ones may
That's
deal
the
with
difference.
it.
Yeah,
but yeah, if you just have your own brokerage account and you're looking out for ETFs, you're not going to encounter that.
Most likely, yeah.
Most likely.
I mean, you should probably take a look at it.
It's where you go into the space of saying, all right, I want a guy who beats the market.
Yeah.
And I started looking at some mutual funds. That's where you begin to encounter the load funds.
Yeah.
So it's just important to keep in mind that as you go into the active management space, you will encounter more funds where you need to pay more attention both to what's in the fund and what the fees are.
Yeah. Yeah, because, I mean, let's face it. I mean, there's 3,000, I think, ETFs, 2,000 mutual. I mean, there's just a lot of funds out there. You know, it's not just one or two. There's tons. So there are different kind of funds. You know, you got Indian funds, and you got, like you said, biotech funds, and you have robotic funds, and you have all different type of funds. You have alternative funds, right, that use different, call option writing strategies. So there's a lot of different strategies out there also that can be beneficial, right? Which, again, and you have to do your homework and think about what percent of your portfolio this may work, right? But the important thing is that there's so many out there that when you pick one, you may say, hey, I like the name of this. Well, make sure that you may like the name, but what's it doing?
What's it doing?
Yeah. You know, American fund, that's for me, American fund. Okay, what's it doing? What are its fees? Yeah. Do they have a front load? Do they not? Right? That kind of thing. You know?
Yeah, you have to know. You have to do your research.
Yeah. And
also, I mean, even if you're not doing it yourself, I mean, your advisor should also be able to explain these things.
Oh, sure. Ask the question.
In other words, yeah, if you asked, obviously, every advisor, has different philosophy, what they're trying to accomplish, the way they lean, right? But they should be able to explain that to you. If you ask your advisor, okay, why is this fund in my portfolio, and their answer is either not an answer or, well, it's too complicated, then they need to be able to explain.
It's too complicated for you. I can't explain.
Don't worry about that. Yeah. Right? That's not a good sign.
No, definitely
they should be able to say, all right, this is what this fund is accomplishing. If it's an active fund, this is why I went with this active manager, right? If it's a passive fund, okay, is there anything active going on in the asset management at the asset allocation level? Yes. Here's the asset allocation. Here's why we went with a passive fund. And so they should be able to explain the philosophy and the risk management that's going on in your portfolio in a way that you're able to understand.
Correct.
Does it mean that you will know all 50 stocks in the fund, or that you'll know why your portfolio manager thinks that rates will go down or up? Not necessarily, right? I mean, there's a reason, that he's not going to be able to impart to you. Like Xavier, you can't impart to someone 35 years of experience in a 2-minute conversation.
Right, exactly.
Right? But you should at least be able to say, look, I believe from my experience that rates are going up or down. That's why this fund
makes sense. Exactly. Yeah.
Right? You don't have to be able to say, here's all the leading indicators that show to me that rates are going to go up or down. Right, and here's all the bonds in this fund, right? But you should be able to explain the connection so that the clients can say, okay, I get why Xavier is making this decision. Do I know all the ins and outs of it? No. But I now have a baseline to be able to say, all right, if this fund doesn't work out, is it because things didn't happen the way Xavier thought they did? Or was it because this fund, things happened the way Xavier said they would, but this fund did not react the way Xavier thought it would?
Yeah.
Because that's going to be a very different, or did Xavier, or the big problem would be, did Xavier do something counter to my own risk tolerance? Did Xavier tell me he was going to, obviously you would never do this, but in other words, that's what you're looking for. In reality, when you're looking to judge your advisor, you're not looking for, did the market go up or down? That's beyond their control.
Exactly.
Right? Or, did they correctly predict interest rates? a little bit in their control, right, but not completely. You're looking for, did they say they were going to make me a non-risky portfolio and make me a risky one?
That's the key.
Really what you're doing. And that's easy to judge when things go bad, right? I mean, if your advisor says to you, I'm going to make you really safe, market goes down 5 and you're down 15, that's when it's easy to be like, oh man, my advisor did not do what he said he was going to do. The tricky part is your advisor says, I'm going to give you a really safe portfolio. The market goes up 5 and you're up 20. You're going to be like, oh man, he's a genius. He was up 20. When in reality, you should be saying, wait a second. He said he was going to make it not risky. Yeah. How'd you get to 20? That's hard to do because you're so happy that you're up 20. It's hard to say, well, yes, I'm up 20, but did he do what he said he was going to do?
Well, that'd be the real good time to say, can I really take a look at this again? Because I'm supposed to be conservative. Can we, since I got up 20, can we reduce this exposure right now, please?
Exactly. Well, I mean, it's your classic. That was the Bernie Madoff Ponzi scheme, right?
Oh, yeah.
If Bernie Madoff had been losing his clients' money 8% a year like clockwork, they would have all called the SEC and be like, this guy's a crook because every year I'm down exactly 8%. But what happened? He was making them.
So he's a genius.
18% a year like clockwork. And they were like, oh man, he's a genius.
Yeah.
Right? What are you going to do? Call the cops on your advisor when he's making you 18% every year? Then I'm not calling the cops on him. He's a genius. Well, he wasn't. He was stealing your money.
I remember that one guy says, I just, it was just another advisor says, I was just looking everything he said he did, I would do it. And it's like my portfolio was up, down. I said, I just don't understand how. What else was he doing that I didn't know? Well, we found out later on.
Yeah. Exactly. So that's always the key.
Yeah. No, absolutely. You said that very, very well. One is transparency, knowing what you need to understand what your own goals and needs are, and this is the kind of portfolio that I would like, right? In other words, we may say, in order to achieve those goals, this is the kind of portfolio we're going to create for you. Are you comfortable? The answer is yes. Okay, so this portfolio is, semi-conservative, conservative, income-oriented, whatever it may be, right? Then you have to, yes, as a client, when we come back to you and review, it's like, okay, how did this portfolio do? Where was the market? Perfect. That's exactly where we expected it to be, and therefore it's working. That's right. And is the income there? Yes, the income's working. Everything we talked about is working, so we're fine.
Exactly, right? Regardless of what direction the market.
Exactly, and you said that perfectly well. And I remember just had a conversation with a client. It's like, the only thing we can control is where the markets go. They go up, they go down. We can control that. The only thing we can control is if you've asked or required, or you have a requirement for a particular type of income, and we generate that income, we're doing our job, right? As to whether the value or the undervalue of the portfolio goes up and down, that's going to change. I mean, anytime, and I tell everybody, other than a 3-month T-bill, you're going to have volatility in your portfolio. You buy a 1-year bill, there's a good chance that could also market value go down. You're going to get it back very soon, but anytime you get out of a risk,
there's a reason that's called the risk-free rate.
The risk-free rate, right? You're going to have volatility in your portfolio. But if you want greater returns, you have no choice. Yeah,
exactly. If someone promises you more return without any
with less risk than the risk-free rate,
risk but more return, then
I'm not sure. Yeah,
that's wait a second. Yeah. So, I think that's our.
That was good.
Our tidbit for today.
I enjoyed that.
Yeah, same here. Same here. Always learn a lot from how you keep
I think it's good to really.
Sometimes
pinpoint some of these small little details.
Exactly. And we appreciate Monica Miller, our fantastic viewer from Montana, tuning in this morning. We appreciate that. We love all our amazing viewers who follow the show, so appreciate that. Be sure to send us future questions, comments.
Yeah, absolutely.
Don't hesitate to send us, you say, hey, would you guys love to cover this one day? Because Xavier and I are always happy to cover some audience topics. If that's something that the audience would enjoy. So always appreciate that.
That's what we're here for.
Next week, we got some great guests that will be coming on. We're going to be joined by another Xavier. And Xavier Taylor, who is the composer, one of the composers for the festival which is Charlottesville Opera is putting up in conjunction with some other groups. It's going to be here in the downtown mall. So Festive All ALL.
Okay.
All are welcome to come to the festival. And so that's going to be coming up. And so we'll talk with them as well as Michael Sloan. Going to be joining us, one of our favorite guests to have on the show. So that's going to be fantastic. We'll also be joined by Matthias Yon for our monthly meetup with Matthias. Looking forward to that tremendously. So that'll be a fantastic show next week.
It certainly will be.
It'll be great.
Absolutely.
Again,
Michael's always great.
Michael's always
he's great, and so is Matthias. So it'll be a really good show.
Exactly. And
anybody named Xavier has got to be also.
To be there, right?
I mean, there are not that many of us.
Slightly biased, but
No, not biased at all.
And James are objectively great people.
That's right.
Although next week we might talk a little festival, and then of course in July is going to be the opera from Charlottesville Opera. It's going to be Lucille d'Amour, the Elixir of Love. But next week will be too late for the Music Man.
That's
so
right.
if you're interested in the Music Man, that is tomorrow.
This weekend.
At 7 p.m., Saturday 1:30 p.m. and 7 p.m., Sunday 1:30 p.m., charlottesvilleopera.org or theparamount.net for tickets. So be sure to check that out this weekend. So, of course, thanks for being on with me.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on again.
Oh, it's always fun. It's always good to have you on. I love being on with Xavier. Thanks to Judah behind the camera, making us all look good. I mean, he had his work cut out for him today. We didn't have any desks to improve the appearance, so he really needed to.
Although at the same time, I guess he didn't have to switch cameras too much.
No,
right?
I know.
Maybe from that perspective,
yeah, but he had to stare at the two of us the whole time.
Maybe he was playing on some app on the side. You never know.
Yeah,
he's good at stuff.
Yeah, exactly. He's like, oh man, I can't take these two. I'm going to watch some YouTube videos while this is going on. Although no, he does a lot of work. I know Judah does a lot of work for I Love CVille Network.
Yeah.
I
see him. He's actively back there.
He's actively managing.
That's right. This whole network.
So he is an active producer of the show. So we appreciate him and the I Love CVille Network. Appreciate Emergent Financial Services, and we appreciate our great partners: Charlottesville Opera, Craddock Serious Insurance, Matthias Yon Realty, Ford Adelante. We appreciate all of you, our amazing viewers. We look forward to seeing you next week. We wish you a warm but not too hot time, and we wish you a great longest day of the year.
Yeah.
So we look forward to seeing you then. But until that time, as we like to close it out on the show, hasta mañana.